Welcome everybody. Welcome to the first of our Beyond Lockdown series webinars. This one today is developing your team for a return to work. My name is Karen Sanders and I'm the Director at HR Department North and South East Hampshire. Most of you will be familiar with what the HR department do. We provide an outsourced HR service. And within my business, a key part of our business is not only HR provision, but also recruitment and training as well. I'll just let Leigh, my colleague, introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Leigh Parker-Bowdery and I'm Head of Operations working for Karen. I head up our training function and that's why I'm part of this webinar for you today.
Lovely. So Leigh and I are going to do a bit of a double act. Leigh's going to start, then come across to myself. And if you've got any questions, it would be really helpful if you could ask them closer towards the end of the webinar, and we'd be delighted to answer any questions that you've got. So Leigh, over to you.
Okay, so we're going to start with the latest on lockdown, latest update on lockdown. I'm just going to talk through, obviously, the status we're at as of today, with some things changing. So some business sectors are now open. Construction, estate agent, factories. There's a plan to reopen others over the next few months with social distancing rules. And then schools potentially back starting in June, though I see from the news today there are some big issues with that. It looks like some teachers' unions are potentially going to put the kibosh on that. So we'll see where we get to. There are some big caveats around all of those, though. So the advice remains, if you can work from home, continue to do so. And we do really need to keep that in mind when we're asking employees to return. Return only if social distancing can be observed in the workplace. If they can get to work, using a safe travel method, if you've carried out some risk assessments, and also one which is if they have childcare, because obviously prior to schools going back, this is a big issue for people. And the Prime Minister did make a bit of an off-the-cuff comment that said, well, if people don't have childcare, employers need to be understanding of that. That's left it a little bit grey for you as employers, so those caveats all existing. So if we move on to the latest on the job retention scheme as well, again, we had some updates on that this week, and it has been extended till the end of October, much longer than I think many of us were expecting. We don't have additional detail on that yet. We're going to get that towards the end of May, but they have made it clear that from the 1st of August, companies are going to be responsible for part paying those furlough payments. So although the extension is to October, I think we're working on the premise that the existing payment scheme will only exist till the end of July. Obviously, what that means, if you utilise that scheme till the end of October, some of your employees could find themselves off work for 7 months. And that's a staggeringly long time to be away from the office and from the workplace, and maybe distant from the business. So with all of that in mind, what can you do whilst those employees are on furlough? And I'll just talk you through what you can and can't do whilst you're on furlough, just as a summary. So you mustn't work. What that means is that you can't ask any of your employees to do any work that makes money for your organisation or any associated organisation, or that provides services to your organisation or any organisation linked to yours. So quite clear, really. You can't make money and you can't provide services, but you can do training. You can keep in touch. There's nothing to stop you being in touch every day if that's what you want and that's what you want your employees to do. And you can still make sure that you're looking after the well-being of your employees that are on furlough. And again, really, really critical, because if you're going to have a bounce back, which is what obviously the government want for the economy and what you're all going to want for your businesses, making sure your employees are in a good place to return is going to be really important for you. So I'll just talk through now what you can and ask to do with carrying out training. So can I ask my employees to do training? Absolutely yes, it is encouraged, as I said. So really we're saying to you, do not miss that opportunity to upskill your employees during this period. We're in a very unique situation. There is time and there are resources there that probably you would never have had at any point to upskill those employees without actually causing any detriment to your business at the moment on your operational day-to-day running. So yes, please, you can ask your employees to do training. Can they refuse to do it is a question that we're coming across quite often. I mean, the simple answer is no, they can't. They're still employed by you. That employer relationship still exists, the contract of employment still exists. So asking them to train is a reasonable instruction. However, what we are saying to our clients is some may not be in a position to be able to, and there will be many reasons for that in their home life and in their current situation they're in. So best thing to do is be reasonable and keep it friendly as far as you can. You're going to get the most out of people if you do that, like you do with everything. And then finally, do I have to pay them to do training? Yes, you do, in terms of any hours that they work needs to make sure that it doesn't push them under the national minimum wage or living wage. So you need to just keep an eye on that. Most people doing a few hours training a week is probably not going to bring them under that because they're obviously on their 80% furlough pay, but you just need to keep your eye on it, make sure that they don't fall under that threshold. And if they do, yes, you would need to top that up.
Great, thanks Leigh. I think we've definitely seen, haven't we Leigh, that we've got some employers who are so nervous about asking their staff to do anything at all that they really shied away from training and they just don't need to.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we found a mixture of things. I think we found some that just, like you say, don't really know how hard they can push it, whether it's reasonable, and probably are just a little bit worried about asking people to do anything because they're just not sure that they can. And then I think on the other side of it, you've got people that are actually pushing the training out there and having a mixed response from their teams and their employees. So you've got some grasping it and going for it and others really not engaging. So I think they're the two main areas of issue.
Absolutely, brilliant. Sorry, I just saw an alert come in. I wonder what it was, but I think people can now hear those that couldn't. So, yeah, so I think there's obviously a lot in the press about, at the moment, I've been hearing more and more this week where employers are forcing employees to work. And that is the one part that's really, really clear in the job retention scheme. And as Leigh said, you know, your staff mustn't work for you, but this training is really actively encouraged. And what I'm going to talk through now will hopefully give you some confidence that you can ask your staff to do training, that it is actively encouraged by government, but actually your staff will probably really value it as well. So I'm going to talk to you not just as a HR professional, but also as a business owner myself, where I have also furloughed some of my team. So I've got some of my team working and some who are furloughed. So I can actually talk to you about, from experience, about some of the things we've seen with those staff that we have furloughed and how they have felt during their period of furlough. So the first thing to say is, I know a lot of people go, oh, people on furlough having a lovely time at home, putting their feet up, very envious of that. Not everybody feels like that. And certainly within my team, that is not how any of our team feel about being on furlough. They're not on holiday. They can't jump on the plane and go somewhere. They can't go on a day trip with the family somewhere else. They're locked down at home. And so that's quite a different experience. And also some of your staff probably live on their own. And the thought of living on your own when you have your work taken away from you, which quite possibly is a very big and important part of your life, will be really, really tough for some employees. Just realised I haven't flicked. There you go, on to the next slide. So a lot of your staff, if they have been furloughed, will be feeling that they've just lost their purpose. You know, for a lot of us, we do spend the majority of our time at work, and a lot of us are fortunate enough to be in a job we really love, we really enjoy, and we get a lot out of. When that's taken away and you're not allowed to do any work at all, there will be a sense of a loss of purpose with some of your employees who are currently furloughed. If you're not keeping in regular contact and communicating with your furloughed employees, they will also be feeling very much out of the loop. And particularly if you've still got some employees who are working, then if you're not communicating with them and you've decided to be a bit afraid of asking them to do any training at all, they'll be feeling out of the loop. Potentially, if some of your staff are still working, they'll also be feeling quite helpless while they see some of their colleagues working really hard, and they'll be wanting to play their part. And that's definitely something that my team members have shared with me. So they want to be kept busy, and actually even some of us who've got very busy lives at home at the moment with having to homeschool and look after the home, even those employees, they're not used to doing that all the time. And once they've got that loss of purpose taken away from them, they can see some of their colleagues still in contact with each other. You know, they do want to be doing something else other than their home chores. So also take the opportunity. This is a really huge opportunity to give your staff some training. Now, as HR professionals, you might think that we are the best at making sure that people are always doing training and always developing and upskilling. But much like a lot of you, work will often get in the way. Sometimes we have the best of plans to develop our staff, and they have their lovely development plans and their appraisals, but work can often get in the way of it. So right now, nothing can get in the way of the training if your staff want to do training and you want them to do training. So use this time and really make the most of it, because we're not going to have this time again, hopefully. So some of you might have tried to give your staff some training. If you're aware that they can do training, you might have tried to give them some things to do. But I'm going to talk a bit about the challenges I found with that when I first furloughed my staff. And I was a bit like this lady, scratching my hair, because I had my team who desperately wanted training, and I was incredibly busy in the business trying to deal with all the HR queries that we've got coming through. And I found myself saying to my team, oh, well, why don't you look at this today? Or why don't you try and learn this? Or I found this webinar, go and do this today. So I didn't really know, I hadn't spent the time to sit down and think about what the best use of this development and training period would be for them. There was a bit of uncertainty around what you could ask them to do at the very outset of the job retention scheme. I was finding that I didn't actually know what they wanted to learn, so it was very sporadic. It didn't sit comfortably with me, and I could see that they felt that they had a bit of a lack of direction and clarity. So I then set to sit down and think about how I could solve that problem and make this whole development training period more beneficial for all of us, and I'll explain what I came up with shortly. But just before I do, I just want to touch on what type of training they can do. Training can take many forms. Obviously, there's a lot of content out there in terms of online training and e-learning that's available, and that's certainly something that we at the HR department can offer and provide. We've got a whole suite of e-learning material. You'll also see, though, much like this, there are a lot of webinars and free webinars available at the moment, and there'll be lots of companies who might have a freeze on training spend. And if they do, there is a lot of resources available. So webinars, online training, all absolutely perfectly fine ways to train and develop your team. But reading a book, you know, that is training as well. Something we've done in our team. I found a book that I thought would be really interesting for people to learn more about disc profiles. And that's something my whole team has really embraced. Even those of us that aren't big readers, we're trying to plough our way through the book, because we know that just by reading this book, it's helping us to understand each other better. But DISC is something that we use a lot in our business. So just reading a book is another way in which people can learn and develop. You can do research online. And the other thing that you can do is shadow others. So long as you're not doing work and you're not providing services to, then maybe some of those employees you have on furlough could shadow some others. And you can't go out and about. What I mean by that, I actually had a question at a networking meeting earlier on this week. One of my networking colleagues said, can I send one of my employees to networking? Well, no, networking, I can't see how you can network without looking like you're providing services, selling the services of your organisation. But then she said, but I'd like her to learn how to network effectively. So when we come back from furlough, this employee could go out and about and attend networking sessions. So actually what she's now going to do is ask her employee to attend the networking online with her, just to observe how her manager pictures her 60 seconds and what a typical networking meeting looks like. Now, obviously, the one thing we can't do at the moment, and I'm a big believer in face-to-face training. I think, you know, for me, that is the best way to train. And sadly, that is the one thing we can't do at the moment. But I do think we'll see online training and e-learning and webinars all becoming much more sophisticated to try and break down that barrier between doing online training that feels very isolated and the face-to-face. So training can take many forms. So I mentioned earlier that I was doing bits of training, my team were phoning, go and look at this, research that, go and attend this webinar. And what it didn't do was provide my team with any structure. And so what I have created is something called my furlough development portfolio. So I sat down, I thought, you know, I want to give my team the dedicated time and resource and some kind of system that they deserve while they're on furlough, that they could have clarity around what they could learn that would benefit themselves, and when we come back from furlough, the business as well. So what I've created is something that I'll mention at the end that will be available to you who have attended this webinar. And would gladly share a copy of this for you. It's a really clear, simple structure you can go through with your team that will provide clarity, a very clear direction, and that sense of purpose that people will be craving right now. It will ensure that the furloughed members of staff who have this portfolio presented to them have their efforts really focused on what's going to benefit the business, you as their line manager, and themselves and their future career. And it does also save management time as well. So much like most things, if you set a project for somebody and you've got very clear tasks and outputs from that, a lot of the time, as long as people understand what they need to do and why they need to do it, they're quite happy to crack on with the project. And I'm finding, having introduced this to my team, it did take a little bit of time up front to get it set up, but now they're just working through their own development plan themselves. So it's absolutely fantastic. I'll talk you through the different steps of going through this process. So what it does, at the very outset, what I really encourage you to do, and actually what it did force me to do, was really sit back and think about what the business needs were. So it made me sit back and think, what actually could I really do with these staff members learning, so that when we come back to work, when we come out of lockdown, what's going to benefit the business and them as individuals and the rest of the team more than anything else. And it wasn't until I did that I really identified their training needs, because I've got a team who I feel are very competent in the jobs that they're in today. They very much fit our culture and our values. So what it forced me to do, when I first sat down, I thought, I don't know what I'm going to get them to do for their training, but it actually forced me to think about what the business might look like when we come out of lockdown, and then what gaps I might have in the skills of the team that I could do with having closed. So that is a really, really important part of this process. So that's the first thing, is to identify what your business needs are now, but think about what your business might look like in 12 months' time. What different skill sets will you need going forward in your team for that change and what your business will look like? And what different behaviours might you need going forward? So one of the things you might have identified, particularly in businesses where you've only got 1 or 2 people now working and the majority of your staff furloughed, you might have identified that you don't have that much resilience within your business. You might have identified you've got single points of failure within your team, and a lot of business owners will think they're the single point of failure, and that isn't often the case. What about the person that processes your payroll? You know, that's a critical point of failure. So look at those single points of failure. What key people do you have in the business? And if they're out of the business for any longer than a 2-week holiday period, what does that mean to your business? You're probably experiencing that right now. You probably have already identified that. So now would be a really good time to think about who else then who's on furlough could I upskill in that area so I no longer have any single points of failure. Once you've then done that, we then move on to the training needs analysis section of the My Furlough Development Portfolio process. And I very much believe in individuals identifying their own gaps. Now, hopefully, they're quite self-aware. Hopefully, as a manager, you talk to them regularly about what their training needs are and how you need to see their areas of improvement. So ask them to identify what their own training needs are first. And there's a whole page within this process that enables them to do that. It gets them to think about what they need in the job they're in today, but also gets them to think about what they want to do, what they would like their part to be in the business going forward. So you would get more of an idea about their future career aspirations as well, and that's really important. I'm a big believer in staff working to their strengths and the team working on things that they actually enjoy. Then once the employee has completed their training needs analysis, they send that to their line manager, and their line manager also then identifies the training needs. Now you will have maybe some the same if you're looking at the job the person does today, but you'll also have identified some different ones because of how you have done your business needs analysis earlier on. So you know what you think your business might look like going forward and the gaps, and so that's where your training needs analysis is really important. You can then also ask anyone else in the business to complete a training needs. So as an example, in my team, Leigh has a team member who reports to her. Leigh then reports to me, so that I have also inputted into Leigh's team members' training needs analysis. But you might have a peer, maybe someone that sits in a different department that has a lot of touch points with that person. So maybe you have someone in a sales role, and maybe someone from the operations team would be really valuable input into that person's training needs. So once you've identified the training needs, we then come on to having a feedback meeting. So that feedback meeting is the line manager and the employee talking through their training needs and agreeing what they are. And so then they start to put together what development objectives can be set within the development plan, which is within this process, to close those gaps. Those objectives are then prioritised, and this isn't something you would typically do in a typical appraisal development plan, but the reason it's so important is to prioritise the objectives in this furlough plan is because you don't know when you're going to need that employee back. So actually you want them to really prioritise the training that's the most urgent, so that when they come back to work, they've already upskilled in that most critical area. That then also gives the employees some very clear direction about what to start and what to end with. You then discuss together what that training might include. So you might have already identified some webinars that would be useful, and the employee might have found a book or already done some research. So really think about what that training might include, so to try and break it down. And then what we haven't done is say, this is an objective that you must do by that date, because everyone's personal circumstances at home are quite different, and their commitment levels to this development plan will be quite different too. But there is a space for them to record on their development plan when they have completed those objectives. And then the last part, which is really, really important, is actually the portfolio of evidence. So another thing I believe massively in is that when you've been on training, you need to implement what you've learned on the training straight away, otherwise you'll forget it. We're in a position right now though, where staff will do this training and they don't have the opportunity to implement back in the workplace what they've learned because they're not allowed to work. So what we're requesting them to do is to create a portfolio of evidence, and what that is for them to document what they've learned, what's been the most important learning for them in that particular development objective, and also to record where the webinar was that they attended, what online training they did, which website they read and researched, so that when they do come back to work, let's just say it was 4 months ago they did that particular development objective, they've got a point of reference that they can refer back to. So it won't be wasted training. They can remember, and because they've documented what they've learned. So this is our lovely Gabi. Gabi is furloughed. This is her here with her furlough development plan. And you can see here she's written a bit of a quote. So for her FDP has given her real purpose. So Gabi has completed her CIPD, but the amount of day-to-day operation, actual delivery, is something where she's focusing her development on. So it's given her a purpose. She loves having the structure, and she's really taken it on board and is just working through her plan, and it's just wonderful. We've got the form is actually online, so it can be completed online, and we hold it on Teams. So she's updating her portfolio of evidence on Teams that I can just dip into and just check on her progress as she goes, and we have a touch base every week on it and just see how she's progressing. And some of the things she'll say, Karen, I researched this, I didn't really understand that. And then she's then asking me questions about the bits she didn't understand. And you can do that as well, because that's training. You know, asking your manager to clarify bits you haven't understood is perfectly within the training remit. So I thought I would just give you, some examples. You might be sitting there thinking, oh gosh, I still really don't know though what I could put in some people's training. So I thought I would just give a few examples. So it's quite possible that with being in lockdown, lots of businesses are being pushed to move from paper to working online. Companies are looking at new systems that they're implementing at the moment. They're looking at new processes, policies and procedures, new ways of automation. If you're introducing any of that into your business and expecting to introduce it when you return from lockdown, then that is all going to be training that your staff need to have. And to give them that training before they come back to work, well, that's just fantastic. Management skills training. So I'm definitely seeing that the type of skills you need in managing entirely remote workforce is very different if you've got staff with you on a day-to-day basis. So perhaps some training for your managers on how to manage a remote workforce. You'll find loads of webinars and online learning and e-learning around how to do that. You could really upskill your managers on how to deal with mental health issues, and for some of your staff, bereavement as well. That's a typical management area where a lot of managers do shy away from. They're worried about what they can and can't say, finding those difficult conversations really, really hard. So if they can upskill themselves on that right now, that would be really good use of their time. Self-awareness, I'm all around managers understanding who they are first. If you're self-aware, then you understand your staff better as well, then you can really play your team to their strengths. And definitely with people working remotely, we're definitely seeing within our team, we're all reverting much more to our natural styles. I would expect that when we return from lockdown, or when you start to maybe look at restructures in your business, there will be an increase in grievances, workplace grievances. So that would be a tip for me. If any of your managers haven't done grievances before, they've got limited experience on that, to upskill them in that area. Managing change. We're all having to manage change all the time at the moment, and I'm sure you've seen that graph, the change curve that we're all going through. But when we come back to work, there is going to be more and more change, and if your managers can understand how to manage change effectively, how to get your staff through a period of change effectively, that will also be time well spent. And I also think we might sadly see more conflict when we come back to the workplace. So again, that's another area you could upskill your managers in. Soft skills training. There's loads of different soft skills training that's really important. Resilience is a huge leadership skill that I believe that every leader in the business should look at themselves and look at how they can be more resilient. But at the moment, all of us are having to try and be more resilient. And I'm even seeing it in my 8 and 10-year-old children, that, you know, they're quite resilient, but I'm trying to find ways that I can help them to be a bit more resilient as well. So anything that can help us to be more resilient will help us when we come back to work, just to accept where we are and move the business forward. Problem solving. Business owners are all in problem solving mode at the moment, and there's nothing greater as a manager that if you've also got staff around you who also have that solution focused mindset. So perhaps look at some problem solving training for your team. Communication skills, empathy, adaptability, time management, they're all things that all of us should do and should have and could do with upskilling ourselves. And I'm certainly seeing more and more of that need at the moment. And then professional skills training. So some of your staff will be in a profession where it'll be very clear right now to identify the gaps that they have in their job today. But maybe there's some parts of the business where we spoke about the key person and single points of failure that you might want to upskill your staff in professionally in a different way. So it might be, I mentioned about a payroll clerk being a very important single point of failure. If you've got an accountant in your business and they don't know how to run the payroll, perhaps upskill them in that area. So look at other parts of the business. If you've got one person in your company that does all your marketing, your social media, perhaps upskill someone else in your business to be able to do that as well. Push your staff to the next level. So if you've got staff who are very competent in the level they're in today, then look at upskilling them professionally to push them to that next level. So you then start to have successes in your business as well. And it might be that when you come to unfurlough staff, you can only unfurlough some people and you might drip feed people back into the workplace. So you might need staff to have some roles in different departments for a short period of time, or bring some people back into an interim capacity. So start to think about what those might be and how you could upskill those on furlough, ready for that. Oh, then I've got the lovely Jane. That says surrounded by idiots. She did it as a selfie, so the photo is the wrong way round. But that's just a quote that she gave of our furlough development portfolio. She's loving it as well, and that's her holding her book that she's been reading to understand more about different types of human behaviour and different personalities. So she's had a great insight into all of us and how we all are, but also her customers and her suppliers and all of her key contacts as well. So just in summary, the last thing I really want to say is your role as a leader. So ultimately, your role as a leader is to help your team to be the very best that they can be. And that means that it's your responsibility to motivate them, to inspire them, and to develop them as well. So please don't sit and think that you haven't got the time to develop your staff right now. You've got a huge opportunity to develop your staff right now, and you should make the most of it. So let's move over to questions. Have we got any questions? Let's see if I can get this to work. So if you've got any questions, please just jot them down. Oh, someone's asked a question here. Which book will you recommend? Well, I've just mentioned one of them. I know you've been reading it as well, haven't you, Leigh?
I have, yes. So it is The Surrounded by Idiots, which is not as horrible as the title might sound. But we do recommend that, particularly from our love of personality profiling, and how people sit in different profiles. This book discusses them as colours, and it's frighteningly accurate. And as soon as you get into it and understand that breakdown, you'll be able to see yourself very clearly in it. But equally, as you read through those profiles, all your employees, all your colleagues, key clients, people like that will all be coming to mind, and you'll be putting them into each of those personality types, and how those behaviours really influence every interaction they have in the workplace, as well as personally. So we definitely recommend reading that, just for your self-awareness, and then also helping you to understand when you're communicating with somebody of maybe a polar opposite type to you, how you might adapt your way of talking, explaining, asking, to get the most out of it and kind of get what you need out of it. So we definitely recommend that one.
Yeah, it has been fun. And actually, we've created a book club. So every 2 weeks on a Friday, should have been today, but we're doing this instead. Yeah. We have a book club where we talk about the next few chapters that we've all read, and we have a bit of a laugh about how we all are, accepting where we are, accepting our limitations, and yeah, being very proud of what all of our different strengths are.
Yeah, definitely.
So Leigh, I think you've obviously been through that furlough development portfolio process as a manager. Yeah. Is there anything you want to add to what I've said about how you found it?
So I think really for me, it sort of, I found it gave me a bit of help really to sort of structure my chats with my furloughed employee. Kind of makes it less focused on, you know, what have you done today? Well, I've just been sitting at home, watching the clock turn. So it focuses that and makes sure that while I'm incredibly busy in my role, that actually those chats, those conversations, all those interactions with my furloughed employee are value added. I also felt that it just gave us a reason to be in contact regularly, really. And obviously what that gives is a lot of motivation to the employee, helps them feel still connected to me as their manager, particularly when I'm not necessarily doing the work that I would usually do within our team, because that's not there at the moment and I'm diverted into other things. So it keeps that connection between us, which is really important, and also to the business. So it gives our opportunities to find out a bit about what's going on, understand what's happened this week. It just really keeps them connected to us and interested in us, stops that drifting away, which you don't want, because when we come back, we want a nice connected workforce that's still there. And also, do you know what, it helps me identify any issues that might be going on. One of the things that we've lost being face to face and over the desk and in meeting rooms with our staff is you pick up on subtleties. You know, you pick up on the body language. You think, oh, something's going on, maybe they're not quite happy, maybe there's something going on that I need to try and get to the bottom of. Could be impacting performance, and all that kind of thing. So I think it's good to remember that as managers, we've still got a responsibility towards our employees while they're on furlough, as much as you have when they're in the office interacting with you day to day and doing their work. So I think it helps me just be a little bit on top of that and understand where my employees at, and help me really just try and get that well-being part of my role as their manager in there as well. So I think that helps me.
Brilliant, thank you. Someone's just asked here, can we conduct an annual appraisal with someone whilst they are furloughed? Well, actually, this is why I created my furlough development portfolio, because when I looked at our appraisal process, has KPIs in it and objectives that are very based around work things and setting projects and things like that. So I did look at our appraisal process and think, there's some bits in here that are training and there's other bits in here that could be classified as work. So my furlough development portfolio process that we've created, it's similar to an appraisal because you're identifying the training needs that you've got in individuals. So by doing that, you're identifying what the gaps are, how you want them to improve. When you have the feedback meeting, you're giving that feedback to the individual. But I've created this so that you are really quite safe in that you can demonstrate that this document, this process that you've gone through is training related. So yeah, what I was going to mention at the end, but it might now be a really good time to mention it, is you will be able to get a copy of this. So you'll be able to see this process. And if you've got appraisals coming up, you've got staff on furlough, I would urge you to use this instead. All you need to do to be able to get a copy of this plan is contact your local HR department office, and they will be able to provide it to you. There'll be no charge for it. It's something we want to offer to you to help you out. Any more questions? With social distancing, can furloughed employees be requested to attend head office for training? Well, I think you touched on really the guidelines of lockdown at the beginning, Leigh, and yeah, I would suggest that's where it comes down to, really.
It does come down to that. So if you're in an industry where you're supposed to be attending work, and you can be attending work, so therefore you've completed your risk assessments and you've got everything in place to enable a safe COVID-19 friendly return, then you probably could, yes, if you can adapt that for your training. If you are not yet back and in one of those industries that's being encouraged back, I would say it probably would be a bit inappropriate to do that at the moment. So maybe hang back until more industries and more types of work are being encouraged back into the actual workplace. I think that's a judgment call, really.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. Sorry, I was just glancing through all the other questions while you were answering. Got a question here, which is related to furlough itself. How much notice has to be given to staff when returning to work? Well, actually, you don't need to give them any notice at all, is the simple answer. So whilst staff are on furlough, they should remain available to work at all times. So if you need them back to work on Monday, you could call them today and they should be available to come back to work on Monday. But, you know, it's all around just being reasonable, and throughout this time you need to be sympathetic to what people have got going on at home. So I would just say the more notice you can give people, the more that you consult with them over coming back to work, the easier that transition will be when they come back, and that your staff will then come out of furlough with a much better mindset than if you give them 1 day's notice. And we've had a few questions around that, haven't we, Leigh, coming into our advice line? Yeah, definitely. So the kind of watchword for us really when we've been advising our clients is, as with every HR process really, to keep you safe and risk-free, we would always say, what's fair, what's reasonable, have you acted fairly, have you acted reasonably? And I think if you can just continue that with everything you do, every interaction, every request of your furloughed employees, then you're going to be protecting yourself and your business. And also, like Karen says, you're just going to be doing basically what's right. And for those people at home, they're going to hopefully respect that, look back on this time period rather than being quite sore about it, or potentially feeling a little bit of animosity towards you because they were furloughed, someone else wasn't, for example. The fairer you can be in how you're instructing them and asking them to do things, the more likely they're going to come back feeling like, actually, I was treated really well during that period. There's nothing else they could do, and they'll have loyalty to you, and that's really important, I think. So just when you're thinking about what you need to do, just take a second with everything and say, right, okay, I need this to happen. What's the nicest, what's the kindest, what's the fairest way of going about that with the employee? And if you can do that, you're going to be in a pretty good position and you won't go far wrong. Brilliant. Just reading this question, if staff are brought back into work on a phased basis, can furlough still be claimed for the hours to make up their contract hours? I think here, this question is probably around the Chancellor talking about the extension of furlough now being up till the end of October, but from the 1st of August being the furlough will be a part-time basis. So the details of that haven't been released yet. We're expecting the details at the end of May, and he has also said that companies will have to contribute. So we don't know what that's going to look like. At the HR department, we've definitely been campaigning for the furlough process to be much more flexible, so that it will allow staff to come back on a part-time basis and have a furlough period as well. So we're very much hoping that that will be the case. Yeah. I think, as with everything with the furlough scheme, because obviously it's been put in as something entirely new, what happens is I think the Chancellor has to announce that something is being done, and they don't actually know quite what yet. So we're always seeing this announcement, which brings a flurry of questions, and us, you know, trying to run our business, it's the same for us. It's like, oh, okay, that changes things. Looks like I might be able to do this for the next 3 months, and all of that, those questions and possibilities come to us. But unfortunately, there's always a little bit of a lag of the detail. So I think, again, what we're saying to our clients is, let's just try not to second guess it, try not to sort of solve everything and have every possibility going through your head right now. Let's just go with what we know, what's in front of us. And then when we know more, let's move to our thinking when we know more, because
we've had our best guesses for a lot of this, and I think we've been very, very accurate, which is good. But some of it's surprised employment lawyers, you know, and the top employment lawyers in the world, you know, some of the things that have come out. So I think we just need to go with what's in front of us right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just sort of flicking through the various questions. There are a number of questions in here that are health and safety related. So neither Leigh or I would claim to be health and safety qualified. And I do know it's a particularly complex area at the moment, and I wouldn't want to be giving any advice on health and safety here. However, all the questions that have come through will be picked up and we'll contact you. We can get our health and safety department to go through those health and safety answers with you.
Yeah, and there will be a webinar, won't there, with the opportunity to ask health and safety questions. So I think next Friday there's a planned webinar that's going to be pure Q&A. So that will give all the attendees the chance to just do a real blitz of questions and answers, and there'll be the head of our health and safety department will be part of that as well. So definitely, if you wanted to get on to that webinar next Friday, that could be a really good opportunity for you to get those answered very specifically by the expert.
Yes, thank you for that reminder, Leigh. I'd forgotten to plug next week's webinar. So yeah, it's a pure Q&A. So any questions you've got, there is a whole panel of different experts. So yeah, book yourself on, so that's 1 o'clock next Friday. Leigh, question here, I'm going to ask you, have you found the furlough development portfolio process time consuming?
No, is the short answer. So I think, like everything, you've got to put a bit of resource and a bit of effort in at the front end. And we talk about this in our management development programme when we carry out appraisal training. We talk about put some time in at the front of it, build the plan, take the time to really make that robust, have your examples, have your ideas. And if you put that bit of time in at the front end when you're setting the objectives, giving the feedback to the employee, all of that really works exactly the same for the furlough development plan. So yes, there's a bit of time that you're going to have to put into it at the front to build that plan for them. Once you've built that plan, as I think you said earlier, Karen, it works quite nicely as really a project plan for people just to go away and work on. So I find that actually there's probably less time than required of me from taking calls at different times. So I think, yes, a bit of time up front to build it and build it well and properly and clearly, a bit of time launching it, going through and making sure that your employee understands what they've got to do. Absolutely. Once you've done that, it's really quite an efficient way of moving that training on. And what I do is I schedule a weekly video call and we just chat through, where have you got to, what have you done this week, what have you found, and then anything that happens in between that time, it might be, oh, I just realised that I need to understand a bit more about this, you're the right person, or who is the right person. You know, we can have a bit of interaction on that, set those up as separate things. So no, not time consuming at all. And I am very, very busy at the moment. And I'm not finding it to be a big issue on my time.
Brilliant. Now, I have found exactly the same. I found it much more time consuming before we introduced it, when I was having the team just contact me whenever they wanted to around training, and I didn't want to push them away. And actually racking my brain about what I could get them to maybe learn and develop next. It did take a bit of time. Actually, that bit about the business needs up front, it was time really, really well spent. Really made me think about what a business might look like. Yeah, definitely. How are we doing for time? Right, maybe one more question. Someone's asking here if we can go through a redundancy process while staff are on furlough. Yeah. Yes, you can go through redundancy process while staff are on furlough. Now, there's a lot. One of the things that we found when we could hear in all other companies, other than our own clients, because obviously they had us to contact, people were just pushing people onto furlough. And there has been concern in the HR community that by doing that, they haven't gone through good selection processes and criteria. So yes, you can go through a redundancy process, but I would urge you to go and get advice from your local HR department office and go through the whole process of everything you have already done in terms of how you have furloughed staff, how you have selected those that you have furloughed, so that you can go through the correct redundancy process. And if there's been any gaps up until now, then your local HR department office will be able to help you to rectify those gaps. But yes, you can go through a redundancy process while staff are on furlough.
Yeah, and I think all I'd just add is that just because of the situation we're in, there's no change to that process and that legal process. So this isn't a time or an excuse or an opportunity to be able to bypass the normal consultation process and selection process. And it's really critical that people do not do that. And there is an expectation in the HR community and actually with insurers that there will be a big uptick in tribunal claims when people are back at work. And that is going to all be around pure and simple process and selection. And if you haven't followed the process and if you haven't evidenced your selection criteria, there will be a claim there regardless of the fact that you've been forced into this situation because of coronavirus. So it's just really, really critical that people don't use this as an opportunity to bypass all the usual good practice and the law.
Yeah, very, very, very valid. So we are 2 minutes to the end. So just to wrap up, as Leigh, I was grateful for reminding us about the webinar next week. That's Friday at 1 p.m. and that is any Q&A. There's no set presentation that the presenters are going through. There'll be a couple of HR department licensees and health and safety licensee as well presenting on that. So that will be really good. And then also, as I said, we will gladly share this My Furlough Development Portfolio with you. No pressure, free of charge, genuinely to help you throughout this time. So just go on to, if you don't know who your local HR department office is, just go on to our website, which I'm sure we've probably got on the site. Go onto the HR department website and within there you can actually search on what your local office is and how to get hold of them and how to contact them. They will have the form and they will gladly share it with you. So thanks for your help, Leigh. As ever, my amazing right-hand person. Much appreciated. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. I hope you found it useful and I hope it's given you more impetus and encouragement to really get cracking with some training with your team.